Good afternoon and welcome back, everyone, to the Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, December 8, 2010, Bill C-33, an act to amend the Railway Safety Act and to make consequential amendments to the Canada Transportation Act. Joining us today, the Honourable Rob Merrifield, Minister of State for Transport. We welcome you, Minister, and I know you've been here before, so you're familiar with the routine. I'll ask you to make your opening comments, and then we'll move to question and answer.
Sure. No, I appreciate that very much. As I open, I want to introduce Luc Bourdon and Carla White-Taylor from the department. They'll have answers to perhaps some of the technical questions if we get that deep, but we're certainly pleased to see this piece of legislation move forward and to be able to get to committee. It's interesting that we chose a day that is on the 25th anniversary of a very serious accident that happened in my riding as 23 passengers and crew died, 95 injured when a CN rail train collided with a Via Rail train in Hinton, Alberta. It impacted the community and the riding a significant amount, and so this is actually very fitting that we deal with some of the railway safety issues. Significant improvements have been made actually since that time. I'm pleased to be here actually supporting this piece of legislation, which is Bill C-33. And it's not the Safety Railways Act, it's the Safer Railways Act. This new bill hopefully will add or amend, make some of the changes that are necessary to be able to achieve a safer railway system. We believe that the proposed amendments are essentially, and not only essential but also timely. They respond directly to the recommendations of two different important studies on rail safety. As members of the committee, you recall that a number of high-profile derailments happened actually between the year 2005 and 2006. Another one in my riding, actually Lake Wabman, that I had some first-hand experience on, but also in Alberta there's a Lillooet. That was in Alberta. There's also in British Columbia Lillooet and Chickamus, and in Quebec there was Montmagny. All these raised some shortcomings in the safety system. Like I said, I was first-hand observer on the Wabman incident, and the last estimate was that CN the cleanup and compensation costs for that incident was over $130 million. These accidents, and I guess we should be saying that when an accident happens on rail, it's very costly, both in human costs as well as in financial costs and very much potentially environmental costs. So whatever we can do to mitigate these is where we want to go. These incidents provide an impetus for the Minister of Transport to launch back in 2006 a review of the Rail Safety Act. The objective was to identify possible gaps in the Act and to make recommendations to further strengthen the regulatory regime. As the Minister of Transport then tabled the review panel's final report in the House of March 2008, and that contained 56 recommendations to improve the rail safety in Canada. Your committee, this committee, the Standing Committee of Transportation, Infrastructure and Communities, began its own study on rail safety in 2006. It accepted the review panel's recommendation and actually tabled its own report in the House on in May of 2008 with 14 recommendations that actually build on those of the Railway Safety Act review. Both reports identify the key areas of improvements and the recommendations increasing Transport Canada's resources to strengthen the oversight and the enforcement capacity and implement new safety initiatives. Transport Canada has taken actions on those recommendations through a variety of government, industry as well as union initiatives, and through the proposed legislative amendments that we're asking for here in the Railway Safety Act. These amendments contained, the amendments contained in this bill will further improve railway safety and make it more consistent with legislation and other modes of transportation such as air and marine. Four key components of the legislation address new powers for four things: cracking down on rule breakers with tough new monetary penalties as well as increased judicial penalties. Number two, it'll strengthen the safety requirements for railway companies. Number 3, it'll create whistleblower protection for employees who raise safety concerns. And number 4, it'll require each railway to have an executive legally responsible for safety. Additionally, railway companies will be required to obtain a safety-based railway operating certificate before they begin or continue to operate. The legislation includes a phased-in approach on the regulatory authority of the government to provide flexibility for smaller short-line railways to have a different risk profile than the large Class A railways. And I think that's an important thing to note, not to be too hard on the short lines. The amendments clarify the authority and the responsibility of the minister with respect to the railway matters, stating that the Act applies in respect to all railway matters within the legislative authority of Parliament. This will ensure that all companies operating on the federal tracks will be subject to the same high level of safety requirements. So finally, to protect our natural heritage from potential harm and the importance of the environment and environmental management is also a good part of the emphasis of this piece of legislation. I know that full well when you saw what actually happened in Lake Wabman, and let's hope that never happens again. While the amendments allow for the creation of more regulations, it's important to remember that an independent safety review panel recommended such amendments after a very thorough research, very thorough consultation and consideration. The government agrees with their recommendations for the items that fall within the federal jurisdiction because they will increase public safety of Canadians. It'll contribute to a stronger economy and cleaner environment. The rail industry is the backbone of our economy. Where almost 70% of our goods and produce travel on rail. It's part of our historic legacy and should continue to serve Canadians well into the future. So I urge the committee to study the legislation very closely. If there are minor technical amendments that can give more clarity, please bring them to my attention. Notwithstanding any minor amendments, I ask all parties to work together on this piece of legislation. It's really very, very much in the interest of all Canadians. It's got nothing to do with politics. This is just all about safer railways and a culture of changing those safer railways. And it's important we get this piece of legislation through in a prudent manner, so I hope that the committee will give it its full attention and move it along very quickly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Mr. McCollum.
Well, thank you, and it certainly is our plan on the Liberal side to work diligently on this bill. But my first question is on another matter, which is the rail service review. I thought the final report was supposed to be out by the end of 2010. I got it still not out. So can you tell us when it will be out and what is the source of the delay?
Sure, I can give you an indication. It was in English on my desk just prior to Christmas. It's being translated right now, and we're preparing to give a response by government to the report, and it'll be out very soon. I don't have an exact date for you,
so
but I can tell you it'll be very quickly.
Days or weeks or months?
Well, I wouldn't say months. I wouldn't, but it's not. We expect it within a short period of time. So that's. I'm not trying to avoid the question. I'm just trying to give you as straight an answer as I know, and we're trying to move it along as quickly as possible.
Okay. Another issue, and this is to do with C-33, has to do with local transit authorities operating light rail or subways or streetcars, like, for example, GO Train in Ontario. I understand that C-33 will apply to at least some of these. And to the extent that's true, my question is, will this new legislation impose additional costs or regulatory burden on outfits like GO Train, GO Transit, and has that been considered in the legislation?
Yeah, it is, and that's part of what we're saying. That short lines, smaller operating, trains should be regulated and have, the burden accordance with risk. But as far as an operating certificate, that's what your question directly asked. Are they going to need one? Yes, they will need one. It seems odd that we would, when it comes to rail safety, impose a full operating certificate on goods and service, but not, people as they move. So there's certainly be difficult to argue that you shouldn't have an operating certificate and the kinds of things that entails when it comes to a GO train.
Okay. Well, in the case, just taking GO Transit as an example, can you say anything to us about the nature or extent of the additional costs that will be imposed?
I wouldn't think there's going to be an awful lot of cost, but maybe I'll pass that question on. It's a little more technical, specific costs. I'm not aware of what they might be, but maybe Luke would have an answer.
In Bill C-33, we make reference to a regulation that will be developed that will actually determine the criteria for a railway operating certificate. And it's at the time of while we're going to develop the regulation, that we'll fully involve all the stakeholders and take into consideration every aspect of their organization. A railway operating certificate will only apply to when you're talking about commuter rails. It's GO Transit, AMT in Montreal, and West Coast Express, and they will require a railway operating certificate while they're operating on federal tracks. If at any given time they're no longer on federal tracks, then therefore they won't require an ROC.
Oh, only on federal tracks?
While they're operating on CN and CP.
So GO Train, for example, does it operate much on federal tracks, or is it mainly its own tracks?
When they're on their own track, I mean, there will be obviously no jurisdiction from Transport Canada. It will be only while they're running on CP or CN. Presently, we have only the authority to monitor compliance with those railways. Any railways, whether you're talking about Urban Transit Authority or provincially regulated short line, we only have authority while they're running on federal track, but we only have authority to monitor. We don't have any authority to take any enforcement. So when something goes wrong, we have to impose the enforcement measure on the host railway. So most of the time, CN and CP, then they have to deal with the provincial authority to get the problem resolved. So,
well, thank you. Another question. I was talking with a Teamsters representative today who mentioned that one of the Canadian railways was thinking of or planning on moving its rail traffic control operation into the United States, and he made the point that this would reduce the regulatory power over such operations if they were in the United States, and also remove jobs from Canada. And also his point was that the Americans would not allow their rail traffic control people to be based in Canada. So the question is, would you be open to an amendment that would require rail traffic control to be located in Canada?
I guess I'd respond to that if the case can be made that it's a safety issue, and I believe that's where Americans are on it. Then I think we should take a look at that. If it's an issue of just where somebody dispatches and there's not a safety concern, then you'd have a tough argument. So I'd invite the committee to take a look at it and give us your best information on and recommendation on that.
Okay. One last question, and you may not be able to answer this because I know it's not your department, but it is a transport issue.
Let me give it a try.
Okay. I'm quite concerned. We've read reports about an apparently large reduction in the numbers of air marshals traveling on airplanes, which seems to me might potentially have implications for air security and also have implications for Canada's reputation in other countries if we radically reduce that program and they don't. So can you comment on that?
All I can say is that's public safety. It's not transport.
I know.
So I'm a little hesitant to get into it, but suffice to say that where the risk dictates, air marshals will continue.
All right. I guess we'll have to wait for Mr. Tays on that one. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just for the advice of the committee, too, I have signed off on a draft letter asking Minister Stroll to provide us with a copy of that report. I'm understanding that it is in translation and
of the
report that Mr. McCollum referred to.
You're talking rail
service review.
Okay.
So we have sent a letter requesting a copy of it. Monsieur Guimont?
Oui, merci.
Thank you, Chairman. we must recognize that we're dealing with a bill dealing with railway safety, and such a bill must be studied very seriously, because when we talk about security and safety, we are talking about lives, human lives. In an earlier life, I worked for 16 years in the pulp and paper industry, and my Anglophone colleagues must have visited such sites during election campaigns, and everyone knows it's a question of safety first being important. Sometimes, however, unfortunately, the companies don't do exactly what they say they are doing or what they claim to be doing. So in this industry, do you intend to use the same sort of approach? Because you will probably be invited back when we talk about security measures with regard to maintenance and repair of airplanes. The sort of maintenance, self-maintenance, auto-maintenance, which the companies are responsible for. In other words, the companies take care of this maintenance. This is not just a case for the Conservative government. We've seen it in other areas, slaughterhouses and other companies. So what's going to happen? Will Transport Canada be carrying out audits and studies?
Question is, if I can recapture what you're saying and get me, catch me if I'm wrong, is that you're suggesting that if we just leave this up to the railway companies to be able to monitor themselves, it likely won't happen. But the culture of safety has got to be something that we set up the regulations and make sure that they're enforced. And the question, I believe, is: are we making sure that does this act make certain that they're enforced? We have put a considerable amount of money into making sure that that does take place. But I think one of the biggest things to ensure that is in the Act itself, which is an accountable executive that will be held accountable if the compliance of the regulations are not there. This is as well as whistleblower protection. So you're right. We want to set up a culture in the railways of safety. And this bill and some of your recommendations are coming from this committee and past, as well as the review of the Act, have asked us to put these in. So they're there, and it's all about changing the culture of safety on our railways. And we will have inspectors to make certain that they comply, and also the muscle to be able to penalize appropriately if it is not complied with. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, if Luc would like to add something.
Juste pour répondre à votre question, Monsieur Guimond.
Perhaps I could add, you were talking about the system for managing safety. There has been a regulation since 2001, regulation for about 10 years now, and our inspection system is never replaced, and in fact we have added some 25 inspectors across the regions. There's a total of 56 additional staff member for railway safety. There's Rule 2D, which requires us to make sure at all times that the railways respect all the rules and regulations in effect. So we're not replacing the system which we have, rather we're improving the existing system. Question: how many inspectors across Canada? How many? And what about the movement of trains? How many trains are moving a day, something like 777 across Canada. Not more than that, about 777 a day across Canada. How many inspectors? Well, we have something like 230 employees involved in safety. Question, you think that's enough? Reply, well, when we're talking about CN and CP, which are considered as being the safest railways in the world, they've got a very low accident rate. Question, well, I addressed this question to someone from CN who said in the past year, or in reference to the past year, because we were told that the directors would be held responsible. Yes, but these directors send a wreath to the funeral, and they express their regrets to the widows, but that seems to be it. CN has told me that in the last year there was one fatality. There were some 10 vehicles at a level crossing, and then there were also suicides. Now, apparently somebody waited 10 minutes before the train came and then went ahead, but I'm saying in the case of traffic, with air traffic, we're going to be coming back as well. Now, as regards railways, it's going to be possible to impose monetary penalties up to 50,000, up to 250,000 for the companies, and we can go up to $1 million a day for failure to comply.
I think the concern is, you know, are we putting enough muscle behind the bill to actually make sure it complies? There's a number of things in the bill, the whistleblower legislation, make sure that that's monitored, monitoring all complaints, make sure that there's an executive accountable. And as a government, we put $44 million towards making sure that we improve the amount of people that are actually monitoring and make sure that it's complied with. So, you know, we're putting forward a piece of legislation with a fair amount of muscle, and we're going to make sure that it's complied with. And that's as clear as that.
Mr. Bevington.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Minister. It's good to see you here. The bill is an interesting one. I want to ask you a number of questions, one of them dealing with your desire to go from work orders to tickets to enforce safety regulations. In the past, and it's my understanding in the United States now, there is difficulty with simply having tickets for enforcing changes that in some cases are very expensive for railways. So they'll simply take the penalty and not do the change to the system that's required in order to bring it up to the safety standard. So where's the evidence that your system is, by changing from work orders to tickets, that we're going to accomplish this?
Well, we're not going to tickets. As I understand it, we're actually going to make sure that we have legislation in place, and we've got judicial as well as administrative penalties in place that will happen, but that's not by ticket. That's by making certain that it's complied with all of the regulations that are in the Act.
So you will be enforcing work orders then?
Yes, we'll be making certain. That's right. We'll be making certain that we work with them. You know, the penalties are fairly stiff, but nonetheless, they're not going to be the first act. They'll be an act when non-compliance is there. It is something that will happen to make certain that the culture and what is laid out in the bill is actually complied with. So, no, you're not going to find inspectors running up and down the tracks, you know, passing out a ticket.
Well, I didn't expect that, but certainly within the way that it's worked out with penalties, that sometimes those penalties are not sufficient to make the company move on a particular issue. So I just want to make sure that that's well understood in this bill.
For an individual, $50,000 per day is fairly significant.
Well, that may be the case.
Yeah.
Now, you know, quite clearly, when you look at the statistics, we do have a problem with safety in Canada, and that's for those people around a railway. How will this bill reduce the number of casualties that we now have in the system? Between 50 and 70 a year deaths from people on the trains or from level crossings.
Yeah. Well, as a government, that's a very good question, and we put money where our mouth is. We're seeing the incidents go down significantly, but one death's one too many. I'm not saying that we can't get better. We have to get better. But we have seen a great improvement. We put $28 million into rail grade crossings. It's a program that is identifying the most risky crossings and working down, and we're making some very good gains on that side of it. But that's not enough. We have to change the actual culture of safety in our railways to make certain that this piece of legislation is brought into force as quickly as possible. Some of the amendments that you've worked hard to bring forward and members of this committee actually get put into law. So that's why this is a very important piece of legislation, and it will go a long ways to addressing some of the concerns.
Is there any thing in the legislation that will drive companies to fence their tracks to a greater extent than they are now?
Well, the bill, makes certain that railways can deal with the railway certificate is going to be worked out to make sure that the regulations actually comply with and enforce what the intent of the bill actually is, which is safer railways, and that's right from environmental risks to human risks to potential of any derailment. So,
So
have an
really,
opportunity to do that in the regs.
The regs are what are going to determine the actual direction that rail companies have to take with these issues. That there's no overriding principle here about.
It's like any piece of legislation. The act is the act, giving the overlying principles, and the muscle to make it happen. The regs will give you the minutia of what has to be complied with.
So. Let me understand then, if you will be able to move into areas where rail companies have existing licenses and ask them for major improvements?
To operate, you'll have to have an operating certificate.
And that operating certificate that exists now, once this bill was passed, what's the nature of the grandfathering of the regulations within this bill? So if we have new regulations, will these regulations be binding on companies with existing operating certificates? How does that work?
Yeah, they will. Yeah, yes, they will. That's what I mentioned in my remarks, that before you're issued an operating certificate, and everyone on a pedal track will have to have an operating certificate, then they'll have to comply with that certificate.
Got some time? 1 minute? There, say for instance, you're looking at systems, and this was one thing that was brought to my attention, and I'm not an expert on railways. I come from the Northwest Territories, but the fact that in this country we don't demand automatic systems for red lights on our trains is something that is brought to my attention as a safety concern, that trains are not automatically brought to brake when there's a red light on. They're still in Canada done manually. Is there something within? Would that come under the provision of regulation, or would that necessarily have to come at a higher level?
I'm not an expert trainman myself, so I'll ask Luke to answer that one.
I think what you're referring to is what we call positive train control, whereas if for whatever reason a locomotive engineer is about to run through a red signal and he's not slowing down or stopping, a system will override a locomotive and bring the locomotive to a stop, or if he's about to take a switch that is in reverse position, the locomotive will come to a stop as well. That technology is currently being looked at in the States. The U.S. Congress, through the Railway Improvement Safety Act required all railways operating on mixed traffic, being freight and passenger, and where there's highly toxic material, to implement positive change control by 2015. However, the cost-benefit ratio is currently 22 to 1. They're working all the bugs out of that system. So in the meantime, we're waiting to see how they're going to manage that system, and we're going to look at it to possibly eventually do the same implementation in Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Bevington.
Just for clarification, was that through regulation, though? That's how you drive that particular change?
That was done in the States by the U.S. Congress, not by the FRA. So for us, it would be either through regulations or rules. But we currently have all the power in the current Act to do it if we wanted to do it.
Thank you. Mr. Trost.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Minister, when you were giving your opening remarks, you described a little bit of what the government had done for consultations in preparation for this legislation. Is there anything more you'd like to add to that, or is there anyone else who the government consulted other than what you noted in your clean statement?
Well, consultation, it's important that players all had input and that they buy into this piece of legislation. If you're going to change a culture, everyone's got to be part of that. That's really the true intent of the bill. It's not to go out, say, I caught you because you didn't comply with something. It's about changing the culture and saving lives and saving equipment and so on, and protecting our environment. So we consulted widely. Stakeholders, they included the railway companies, industry associations, railway employees, the unions, the railway customers, their associations, the municipalities and their associations, provincial and territorial governments, Aboriginal, environmental, emergency response groups, the public, Transport Canada, and other federal departments and agencies. I don't know if I've missed anyone in Canada, but I think that covers pretty much everyone. We actually have a tremendous amount of user support and interest support. In fact, I don't know anyone who is standing up saying this is a bad idea, we shouldn't be going here. So the consultation is one thing. It is extensive and it's broad, but what is really most important is that people are saying, and both railways and those using the railways are saying this is something that's overdue and we should implement.
Now, this legislation introduces some new oversight tools. Is there, could you give us just a brief summary of what you feel the main ones are and why they were included?
Well, yes. I mean, the oversight tools. The first one is, the operating certificate, so that you have, this certificate is a compulsory part of the Act. If you don't have it, you're not running, and that is very important that we make sure that that's complied with, and we also make sure that it's complied with on a risk basis analysis. So the two major railways in the company are not going to have a problem getting an operating certificate. They're going to be compliant. They're large enough to be able to handle that. We have to make sure that all of the other railways that are less risk, short lines, are not disadvantaged too terribly, and yet still comply with an operating certificate that meets the risk. So those are things that are here in the Act that if you can improve them anyway, as a committee, take a look at, but it's certainly something that I think will go a long ways to deal with the oversight.
Now, there's a difference between oversight and enforcement. And it's not just with oversight that the bill makes a certain number of changes. It also gives certain new enforcement tools. What specifically, the what and the why for the new enforcement tools?
Yeah, the enforcement tools are very important, and they're not only administrative penalties, but it's also judicial penalties. So if you are not going to comply with this, you're going to pay a price. And it's similar. It's not that it's not tested. It's tested in the aviation. It's tested in the marine sector. These penalties comply with, similar to those other modes of transportation. $50,000 for an individual, $250,000 for a corporation. That's each day of non-compliance. That adds up in a hurry. So the second thing, on the judicial side, been there for 20 years, but we're talking $1 million for a corporation, $50,000 per individual of each day of noncompliance. So that adds up in a hurry as well. The Act, some people may say, well, these are too strong. Well, I don't think necessarily they're too strong, because they're not the first thing that'll happen. The first thing that will happen will be the inspectors will say, hey, you're in noncompliance, and this needs to take place for you to comply. And it'll be when there's resistance to making certain that the safety issues are not addressed. So it won't be, I got you. It'll be a fair amount of negotiation between the user and Transport Canada before Transport Canada will actually impose the penalties. But the penalties will be imposed, and they'll be imposed aggressively if noncompliance is there.
Now, one of the interesting things I saw in this bill, and you mentioned it in your remarks too, was an executive for each company who is responsible for safety. Yeah. Don't know if I'd ever seen that in anything else. And again, I'm fairly new to this committee, so the first year I've been on it since the fall. What was the reasoning behind it, and could you elaborate a little bit more on what this executive would be responsible for? And is it for all companies, even short lines, everyone involved?
I actually think this is one of the, perhaps you're right, more unique tools in the bill. But the one that I think will actually make the biggest difference, because if you're that executive and you're next in the news, you're going to make sure that it's complied with. It's not just that the corporation and those who run the rails, you say, well, okay, you've got to comply with a certificate. That's one thing. But when you have named an individual who's an executive of that railway, that individual is personally held responsible. I believe you'll get a better compliance, and that's really what that's all about. It's interesting. I was there firsthand at the Wobman spill, and just to give you an idea of how difficult it is if you don't actually have a plan and have well thought out what emergency situations can present themselves to the corporation. But when I was there, railway is transport. Once you have a fluid move off the railway site into a lake, once it's in between the railway and the lake Wobman, well, that's environment. And once it gets in the lake, well, that's fisheries and oceans. And once it gets to the other side of the lake, that slick is First Nations, which is Indian Northern Affairs. So you had, and that's the same provincially as well as federally. So the stalemate was, whose jurisdiction was it to be able to deal with this thing? And there was no plan. I remember standing in the back of a pickup, or sitting in the back of a pickup where I had just gone for a helicopter ride, and this Lake Wobman came down, and they said, well, what do you think we should be doing here? And I said, well, the water skiers should be moved off the lake so they didn't get all this oil slick on, get disrupting it. And they said, well, we don't have jurisdiction. These are the kinds of things that have to be corrected before a disaster. You have to have a plan in place. You have to make sure that plan, everyone understands it. You have to, know that you have the boom material and so on is there. So, at any rate, it is very important that we have a plan in place, and that it's complied with, and that we have a culture of safety that is taking place.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Mr. Dhaliwal.
Thank you, Minister and Associates. Minister, my question to you is this. Why are the urban transport authorities being impacted by this bill, and they are so concerned when they have a stellar safety records? Number one, and how are you going to protect the taxpayers with the inclusion of urban transit authorities into this bill?
Okay. If your question is when it comes to urban, this is what you're saying, that they weren't consulted? Well, actually, that's not true. In fact, when we announced this piece of legislation, we did it down in Oshawa because we just had with Oshawa, Ajax, Pickering, and Whitby. They're very concerned about this because they just had a major spill. We consulted with them, all the mayors across the country, and it's very important that they had the input and make sure that that this culture is of safety is something that they're very concerned about, because when it comes to their urban dwellings, there's a lot at risk, and all of these trains go through these urban centers. So
No, but I mean,
I don't know exactly what further you're talking about. Maybe I missed your question exactly.
No, my particular question is, like, I come from Vancouver, Greater Vancouver area, and when it comes to TransLink authorities, why are they so concerned about this bill if you have already made those, you have reached out to those authorities, you have consulted it, and isn't it this bill impacts taxpayers in a very negative way? When it comes to TransLink, they have a great safety record in the system.
Oh, what you're saying is, why would they have to comply with a certificate? Is that what your question is?
Right.
Well, they will comply if they're intersecting with the federal track, as was just described. If you're hauling passengers on a federal track, why would you think you would be exempt from safety? In fact, they were the ones that you would almost think they would be the first ones that should be there, not the ones that should be exempt. But that'll be worked out. I don't know if, Luke, you have anything further to add to that, but
For us, it's an issue of accountability right now, and we don't think it's going to cost money to do it. I mean, right now they have to comply with the rules of the host railway. The railway operating certificate will basically tell us which rules apply to them. We'll give them the ability as well to ask for exemptions, to have a regulatory regime tailored to their own operation. Right now, when, for instance, there's something, give you an example, whereas one of their cars have some wheels that are not in compliance, we got to go after CN or CP. So CN, we got to take the enforcement measure on the host railway so they get the commuter rail to fix these wheels. I mean, with the railway operating certificate would allow us to go directly to the railways who's in non-compliance and ask for the situation to be fixed. Second thing is that the railway operating certificate will be determined by a regulation, and at the time of that regulation, all the stakeholders will be consulted, and therefore the Urban Transit Authority will have a chance to talk to us and let us know how we can adapt that tool to their own operation. And we've been very clear to all the provincially regulated railways, such as the Transit Authority, that we would listen to them and try to have a tool that would suit their operation.
So when you say that it's just a matter of accountability and there are no additional costs, are you certain?
It shouldn't be. I mean, it's part of doing good business. Some of these Urban Transit Authority have already developed some safety management system. They have them. Some of them are inviting us to do audits on their property, although we can't at this time because they're not regulated. It shouldn't cost a lot to do it, and I think it's part of good safety business to have these tools in place.
So when we move different types of cargo on different tracks, would there be different regulations in place, or how are you going to balance the movement of goods efficiently and also for the economic competitiveness with the other ports, like ports in U.S., but at the same time, we have those safety standards?
As far as we're concerned, regulations apply to all railway. They're the same. Rules can be adapted to the type of operation, but everything is done from a risk-based perspective. So there's nothing that will conflict that would put one railway against the other and be less safe than the other. So it's all taking into consideration the way we're doing it.
Thank you.
About the only cost would be if you have an operating certificate to get that, you would have to change something which is complying with safety. There may be a cost, but that is in their best interest as well.
Monsieur Godet.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to go back a little bit. You said you were checking just the CN and the CP. Is that correct? Reply, no. What did you say? I was explaining, under federal jurisdiction, there are some 31 railways. and they are all subject to Transport Canada. Now, it's different for those trains under provincial jurisdiction. If they are traveling on other lines, the host railway has to have rules respected. This is when they are operating on CN or CP lines. We cannot deal with these companies directly. We have to call upon CN or CP to make sure that rules are respected. Question, so if there were an accident, would Transport Canada go to look into the matter? Reply, if it was on a CN or a CP line, if the accident was on a CN or CP line, it would be our responsibility. Question, you were talking about inspections. Do you inspect the 31 railway companies you referred to? How many employees? Well, once we will have more than 200, about 230 once the review is completed, for carrying out all the inspections, infrastructure, tracks, level crossings, bridges, and so on. We have a team for equipment, cars and engines, and also, well, when you're talking about respecting rules and so on, do you have something to deal with accessibility for washrooms, for example? Now, when we're talking about people with reduced mobility who want to be able to use a via rail washroom, they're supposed to take care of that. It's not us, unless we see that there's a safety danger involved. So you inspect these 31 companies. How often do you carry out inspections? Reply, it's based on, well, the profile of each company. It's based on a risk basis, so that companies whose operations we know well and we know that they respect the rules very well, whereas if there is a company which is less compliant, we would deal with them more often. Now, CN and CP carry about 72% of traffic in Canada, so we spend a lot of time on these two railways. Question, does VIA have many accidents? Reply, no, it's really proportional. Thank you.
The railways are appreciative of this, and it's not that they're not concerned about safety. They are. They know when there's a derailment, an accident, this costs them a lot of dollars. The last thing they want is a derailment. So they really are wanting to comply with whatever needs to be to make sure that they can run safely. So this is actually a win-win situation, win-win bill for everybody.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Minister.
Welcome to our committee, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And through you to our witness, Minister, you mentioned the Federal Railway Crossing Improvement Program, stating that projects are prioritized according to the level of danger. What data or statistics are used in order to determine what constitutes a level of danger? How do you put in order of precedence which rail crossings need to be done first?
Well, I don't do that as a minister. It's done by committee experts who look at the risk, volume of traffic, the grade, the sight lines, all of the things that go into crossing safely, and then they assess them. And I don't politically interfere with that. I just say, hey, let the experts decide, discern. based on the criteria. And we roll the program out. So we can't do them all at one time, but we're rolling it out over the last couple of years. It's I'm sure most everyone here has had some experience of good changes to rail grade crossings in their ridings or constituencies. So we'll just continue to do that good work, but it's the experts that make that determination.
Okay, so is it based on the number of accidents, the number of deaths?
Yeah, some is the number of accidents. All of it is a part of the criteria. It's yeah, the number of incidents would certainly factor into it, but it's also volume of traffic, sightline, speed of traffic, all of those and probably more. Maybe Luke could give us even more criteria that
we look first. There's the history behind the crossing, how many accidents. There's a cross product of vehicle, trains. If something happened recently, as well, we'll do a risk assessment of the crossing as well, and we'll determine which one should be dealt with first. The number of complaints we receive, if for whatever reason there's been a lot of urban development around a crossing that there was no history 3 years ago, and now it's becoming more problematic. So that's how we determine the list. And so far, statistics have shown that the crossing that where the crossing that were improved, accident went down by more than 80%. So it's pretty effective.
Well, on the topic of urban development, Minister, as you know, there's going to be a lot heavier traffic going into the GTA. For example, the CP is bypassing actually part of Eastern Ontario and just taking the direct line right to Toronto. And if anything needs to go from Eastern Ontario, it goes to Toronto, then back up and causing greater congestion and more traffic, rail traffic, on the way to the GTA. So in addition to more urbanization, what measures would your ministry be taking in order to further safeguard the people in Toronto? They too have had major derailment in addition to the one that you described recently back in the early 80s, late 79, 80, there was the derailment in Mississauga, which there required to be an evacuation as a consequence of, I believe it was chlorine gas. So what can you tell us that we're doing as a government to ensure the safety of the people in the Toronto area?
Sure. No, and I think it's a very good question, actually. Where in the Pickering area, there's a stretch of railway there. It's, I think, some of the highest density of train traffic there is in Canada. Number of derailments, and we want to assess every one of those and discern what can be done to be able to mitigate, the kinds of risks that are there. This act will help, certainly, but there's a continuous assessment on the grade crossing side of it to try to alleviate the pressures there. And like I say, if we can improve 80% just by this one program alone, that's very significant. We have seen a continual number of reduced incidences of railway deaths and accidents over the last couple of years since the program started. Now, that doesn't. We still have too many. I'm not saying we're there yet. I'm just saying that we have come a long ways. We just have to continue the pressure to be able to address, that situation. With regard to volume of traffic, I mean, that's the railways make those commercial decisions. We don't interfere that way. They're not changing the track. The track's there. We're just trying to make sure that when they run on that track, it's as safe as it possibly can be.
And there are inspections of the rail beds as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Beds, rolling tracks. So.
We talked about derailments and accidents. Aside from derailments, going specifically to accidents, what sorts of accidents, and I'm not talking on purpose, suicides, what sorts of reasons are behind the accidents that occur at rail crossings or otherwise?
Well, I think there are a multitude of them. And every one gets inspected and analyzed, whether sometimes it's weather, sometimes it's somebody not paying attention. There's all kinds of difference, no different than any major accident on air. We want to inspect it, we want to learn from it, and we want to try to address it. If there's something we can do to make it safer, that's where we want to go. And that's all part of sort of the culture of safety that we need to make certain that we continue to promote when it comes to rail. Railway, traffic movement, both by passenger as well as produce, it's going to do nothing but increase in Canada. So we have some of the safest railways in the world. That doesn't mean we can't do better. We have to continue the pressure on. So that's what this bill is really all about, and it's the good work of this committee. It's the good work of the review of the act earlier, that these recommendations are coming forward. We put them in this bill. Hopefully we'll be able to make some very good changes.
Thank you. And if I may, Minister, I know that many of my communities have benefited and actually believe strongly in the upgrades to the crossings. I know it's an ongoing challenge, but there's a lot of demand out there, and whatever you can do would be greatly appreciated. I'm going to give every side 1 minute or one final comment. If you don't have one, that's fine. And then we'll move to the end of the meeting. If you're okay. Mr. Guimond, you're okay? 1 minute? Okay. Mr. Bevington, 1 minute?
Because I think those are, it's my understanding there's about 44,000 crossings in Canada. Is that kind of the number that we're dealing with? And we're dedicating 28 million to crossings that in some cases are to fix in a proper fashion are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Is that correct? So we've got a ways to go in terms of the financing. What in this bill would drive companies or to improve their standards of level crossings without the support of the federal government?
Well, all of the things to make sure that they comply. The question earlier was, every crossing has different reasons why there was an incident there, but so they have to be inspected. They have to, is it track? Is it, the grade coming up? Is it, the lights on it? Is it, rolling track? Is it the actual track itself? I mean, lots of different things that can cause a problem. They all have to be discerned, and we have to address it. All we know is that we're not done yet. We have to work harder, and we are making a considerable amount of gains with regard to those incidents. You say, well, is 28 million enough? That's over a couple of years, and so we've made great strides with that those dollars in the last. I think that was announced in 2009 budget.
Thank you. Final comment, Mr. Jane.
Chair, and thank you, Minister, for attending today, and officials. And in particular, I want to let you know, Minister, that all the committee members, including Mr. McCullum and Mr. Guimond and Mr. Bevington from all parties, have agreed to have extra meetings so that we can make sure all regular meetings are going to be for C-33 until it's put through. So I want to let you know that, all members have agreed to do that, so we have extra sittings, and I think that shows cooperation on the part of all parties. And I don't want to be picky or pick on anyone, but I understand the Mayor of Pickering has approached you several times in relation to this particular bill, and I understand other mayors around the GTA in particular are very interested in this bill. And I was wondering if you could just not give us specifics on the conversations, because I understand they're somewhere in the hundreds or so as far as the Mayor of Pickering and the department, but general terms, general information, general input by mayors in that region, by particularly politicians in the GTA, and how they feel about this particular act.
Sure. In fact, when the incident happened, it was a number of incidents over a very short number of years in their area. And the Mayor of Pickering, we were down, actually made the announcement there, and he was actually very excited. He read the bill, saw what we were trying to do, and said this is exactly the kinds of things that he was looking for over a number of years to make, the last number of years actually pushing governments to bring in a piece of legislation like this. So when you're out there, you always, when you introduce a piece of legislation, you wonder, well, who's going to support it, who's not going to support it, who's giving trouble to, and who is applauding it. I can tell you the numbers of people in this country that are standing on the side applauding it are immense. The ones that are pushing against it are very few and hard to find. So that tells you that it's long overdue, and this isn't got anything to do with politics. This piece of legislation really is in the best interest of the industry as well as the country, and I would certainly encourage all your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, and the support people that helped us today. We appreciate your time. Again, for the information of the committee, on Thursday we will be bringing other witnesses. We'll have staff as well as other witnesses for that 2 hours, so come ready to ask more questions. Thank you, and meeting adjourned.